Yeah. Well, they used to itemize, yeah, well, they still, when well, before the saw, you could.
All right, good afternoon, everybody.
Okay, it's done.
Nice to see you all. We're going to go ahead and get started, even though I think a few folks are still trickling in, and we're still working on being able to see our live stream participants online. I know we have at least one of our panel participants is participating remotely, but they can see us, and we can't see them, which I find a little scary, but we're going to get through it. Our chairman is on his way down, I believe. A couple of other commissioners, we actually thank you all for being willing to move the time of this meeting. We lost a couple, we lost and gained the commission in this moves, but I guess we'll have four others. I want to start by reminding everybody we are recording as well as live streaming, and introduce the commissioners that we have with us. Do you want to just say hello?
Erica Williams, Carolyn Bragg, Yashim Sayan,
David Schwartzman.
Paige Ledwin,
Mike Nickerman. Right.
Jen Jenkins.
All right. So good. You beat me to it. So.
We got one more over here.
I thought we just introduced.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too.
Yeah.
I'll Bill Lamar.
That's good. No, David jumped ahead and coming to the very next thing I was going to do. It's nice to see you all.
We just invited ourselves to the tax revision commission.
I'm going to go ahead and start, and I will give you a chance to reintroduce yourselves to us. We don't have table tents for me. I rolled it all like that this morning, so you can remind us who you all are and share a brief statement of thank you to those of you who have also submitted materials. I want to give you a quick overview of kind of where we are in the process. And some of this, if you've been following the work of the commission closely, this will be a little bit of a refresher, but possibly not all of you have been following this incredibly closely. So I want to make sure we're all just grounded in the same place. As you know, every 10 years, the council and the mayor appoint an 11-member commission to do a careful review of the tax system. Now, the last tax commission in 2013 advanced some very major changes, which the council and the mayor did adopt. At the same time, a lot has changed in the last 10 years, and particularly over the last few years, the economy, the tax base, community priorities. And so we have this really important opportunity through the commission process to rethink our tax system, essentially from top to bottom, and to propose to the mayor and council a set of recommendations. And the commission has adopted the following principles for what we're adopting. First, we've set a sort of a set of procedural principles. We're following the data, making sure our recommendations are based on sound research. We're trying to make sure that our recommendations are shaped by the experiences and needs of people across the district from a diversity of perspectives, and that the recommendations are devised collaboratively across the diversity of perspectives that we have within the commission in order to ensure bold and thoughtful changes. So in our recommendations, we've agreed as a body that we aim to achieve the following: a broader, resilient tax base for a post-COVID economy in order to protect against economic shifts and shocks and ensure future funding for high-quality public services and share tax burdens fairly across the community. Progressivity and racial equity to eliminate racial disparities, protect low-income residents, lift up our middle class. Economic efficiency and competitiveness. Yeah, how are you? In order to advance growth and prosperity for all residents. And our fourth principle, simple, open, and fair administrative processes in order to reduce compliance burdens for residents and businesses. So you all represent really important constituencies here in the district, and we're here to hear from you today. And through this and other options for engagement, we want to know what shifts you and other DC residents think can help us reach all of these goals and build a healthy and thriving district for the decade to come. So over the next 3 weeks, starting last week and continuing through this week and into next week, we are convening about 10 meetings with small groups of key stakeholders who we think can bring really important points of perspective into our deliberations. We're also holding 2 public meetings at which members of the general public can present those perspectives. Those are next week on Monday and Thursday, in person on May 1st at the Arc and in Ward 8, and May 4th, a virtual citywide meeting. Last week, we had a meeting to which we invited all the ANC commissioners. And our job in all these sessions is to listen and to learn. And just so you know, at this point, the commission has not ruled anything in or out. Now, in the course of our work so far, we have talked about a lot of the current challenges that confront the system. A changing economy is affecting revenues. Some taxes hit hardest to those with least ability to pay. We've talked about tax breaks that benefit only a few. We've talked about the federal law that shields Maryland and Virginia taxpayers from commuters from tax. We've talked about economic competition with our neighbors across the country. We've talked about aspects of the tax codes that reinforce racial equity. And we've talked about the fact that a lot of people in the district find our tax system is just too complicated and hard to deal with. Now, we acknowledge not all of these challenges, maybe none of these challenges lead directly or clearly or obviously to solutions. Some of them are technically difficult and or they involve complex trade-offs. And commissioners have already started to hear about a number of different policy options. Earlier this year, in the spirit of transparency, we produced an initial list of possible policy options. You may have seen those on our website. And we're continuing to grow and develop our list and continuing to put them on the website. So over the summer and into the fall, the commission is going to begin to refine and narrow down our list of potential policy options. By December, our intent is to agree on a final package of recommendations that we will present to the council and the mayor. And as we refine and develop these proposals, we're going to be continuing to post them on the website and talk about them publicly. And so you and others will have additional opportunities to weigh in and communicate with us on specific proposals as they bubble up, as well as on the package as a whole as it comes together. We know we have a really difficult job. We know that unlike the last Tax Revision Commission, which compiled its recommendations in a time of rapidly growing revenues and budget surpluses, we may be in a time of somewhat constrained revenues. Many of the provisions enacted in the last Tax Revision Commission on net cost DC revenue. Now it's time at a time of budget surpluses in DC. And it's not clear that right now the policymakers are going to have that option. So today's conversation, as I said, is about listening and learning from you. We're happy to answer questions that you might have about the commission's work and how we can do it better. But really, our main purpose is to gather your ideas on how to make the DC tax system work better. So you're not going to hear a lot of opinions from us, even if you present a really terrific idea or even if you think you present a really terrible idea. That said, we might ask some probing questions, and I encourage you not to read too much into that. In a moment, we're going to go back around the room, and I'll ask each of you to share your name, your organizational affiliation, your preferred pronouns, if you're comfortable sharing those, and a really brief 2 to 3 minute summary of both what community or perspective you represent and your priorities and ideas for the work of the commission. And so we'll go around, and I know we have one participant online and invite her to speak as well. And then after that, we'll open it up for Q&A from members of the commission. And we'll start with commissioner questions of you all. So, and we sent out a whole bunch of questions to you in advance, but we're not going to stick rigidly to those. We want to be responsive to what you all are raising with us. After this, we will be writing up minutes and one sort of thematic summary of this and each of the other conversations we're having. We'll also be posting the full recording online. And in addition, as you know, we do have a mechanism for you or others to continue to post statements to our website. Any thoughts you have that will become part of the record. So I just want to close by thanking all of you for taking time on this lovely Tuesday afternoon to be with us in this conference room to talk about taxes. Let me turn it over now to Mayor Williams to share anything and that other commissioners can add to what I've just said, and then I'll open it to go around the table.
No, I would just emphasize that this is just one opportunity to weigh in. You can weigh in through the website, weigh in through us individually. And one thing that I don't know whether you mentioned it before I got in, but we will be sharing, iterations of our work with the stakeholders to get your comments as well. So we're into having comments and having inputs. With that, we can go around the room for the more introductions.
Well, let me see if, folks already introduced their names, presentation, but we're gonna go back around in a minute, but let me just see if Erica or Carolyn or Yeshin.
Covered it.
Nope. Is there anyone, Mike, is there anyone else from the commission on the webinar? Just so you know?
Jody might be joining us in a little bit, but I'll let you know.
Okay. Okay, so let's.
And let me also just say, we're having some difficulty showing you, what members of the public can see, but they can
see
speak
us.
to us and hear us through the owl, so.
Okay,
Are we missing anybody that was gonna, I know.
Yeah, Robert Warren can't make it, he's gonna come May 3rd.
Okay, great.
So we have Jen, David, Raul Mar, Keish, and Judy Etsy's on the phone. So should we just start in that order? Start us off, Jen?
Sure, I'm happy to. So my name is Jen Jenkins. I'm I use they them pronouns. I'm policy counsel with Legal Aid DC. And thank you for having me here in that capacity. Basically, I just, as a short summary of what I submitted in our recommendations were three main things, and I can get, of course, into more detail later on. First was considering expanding the local EITC tax credit, especially around incarceration. Next was implementing the DC child tax credit, and then finally recommending the automation of local tax filings. That's it.
You can say a couple of sentences more about each of those if you can.
Sure. So,
I'm not put you on the spot.
no.
Okay. I appreciate that. Just in being succinct, thank you.
Of course, but I want to leave prepared, yeah.
And you get an award in DC for being succinct.
So the first recommendation is around incarceration, like I said, and there's a few different proposals within that recommendation for expanding EITC. So it basically you could we want to make sure that work, or we would recommend that work that happens during incarceration could potentially count for an EITC tax credit. We recommend that a person who was like any work that happened prior to incarceration could be potentially count as a part of the tax credit. That's within 3 years. We recommend that families who support people who are released from incarceration, who are doing the work of what potentially would be like social workers or nonprofits, they're really taking care of their family members who are coming to them. And these family members tend to be women of color, specifically Black women who are taking care of their loved ones who are turning to them. So they would be able to count that loved one as a dependent. And we also recommend, there's this newer idea of creating just an entirely new credit for people who were incarcerated, and it would be named after them. And we cite the example of under the federal tax code of elders having their own special elders. I think it's 65 and up, who have their own special category of tax exemption. And we think that DC could do that on a local level for people who are incarcerated. And then the child tax credit, I think, is basically self-explanatory. We really leaned on our partners from DCFPI to make that recommendation. So I'll just cite just straight from what I wrote. So we suggest that the child tax credit is targeted to families up to 300% of the federal poverty level. And our understanding is that over nearly 80,000 children, including tens of thousands, who are no longer eligible for the federal child tax credit. So we fully support that idea. And I think I might have neglected to mention that we believe DC's defined community is at 200% below the federal population. So that's the experience from which I speak, and our primary concern is that that's who's in our client community. And then the final recommendation, and I hope I've spoken about the first two enough, but I'm happy to.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So the final recommendation is the automation of local tax filings. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with how other countries they do their taxes for their citizens. And while we recognize that the IRS might not be there in terms of doing their taxes, we think that DC is more than capable of it. And we would like to see the Office of Tax Revenue take up the task and be really a leader in the country in doing the taxes for its citizens. And we know that, we understand that this would be especially beneficial for low-income residents, particularly because according to the IRS, on a national level at least, it takes about, I want to say 14 hours, if I'm remembering correctly, to do your taxes, and at over $200. And we know that that would benefit poorest residents probably the most, because then that gives them time to take care of their families and, do things besides their taxes. And as someone mentioned earlier, it's really challenging too. I'm a lawyer, and I still am like, what does this mean on my 1040? So those are our recommendations. So thank you for the time.
So, thanks so much.
Jody is offline as well.
Okay. Good afternoon, Jody. We understand you can see and hear us. We can't see you as of yet, but glad you're here. Let's see. The next one, move back.
Sure. Good afternoon, and thank you all for the opportunity. I'm Bill Lamar, pastor of Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church right around the corner. Also very active in the Washington Interfaith Network. And again, thank you for the opportunity to share. I want to begin with the fact that doing research and talking with people who have much more knowledge, and also talking to organizers, it started to begin with the statistic that 0.4% of the people in the District of Columbia, 50% is women. 0.4%. And that's in excess of $180 billion. And obfuscatory language like meritocracy and hard work has been used to explain why. But the accumulation of that kind of pornographic wealth is not meritocratic. It is not because of racist notions of good reading, learning. It is because these powerful people have been able to shape a tax code which benefits them and harms the majority. Remember the first time I heard one of the gods of capitalism, Warren Buffett, say that in effect his secretary pays more taxes than he does. That those who earn dividends pay less than those who earn wages. And that is true nationally, and it's true here in the District of Columbia. We say that we're in this together, but our tax policies tell a different story. Those who inherit wealth, capital gains, dividends, corporate and non-corporate businesses, income and property ownership, they are able to accumulate. And by and large, they are the white citizens of the District of Columbia. They're able to pass these assets to their children with little taxes, sometimes none. And while we made great strides to reduce the taxes paid by our very lowest income households through an earned income tax credit, more can be done to help those who suffer. I think we have to begin every conversation with the fact that this is a house built on inequality. It's a house built on the violent extraction of labor and wealth from many groups of people. And the problem with the way that we begin these conversations is we erase all of the extraction. We erase all of the history, and we say that what needs to be done to make it equitable is too hard to do. But it wasn't hard to create this system because those who ring your bells and fill your inboxes, the donor classes, are able, by and large, to get what they want. We've got to do something different. We've got to have the courage to build the kind of city that meets with the rhetoric that the District of Columbia has about itself. So just a few things I want to share. We should get more cash to families with low and middle income. We can do that, and we must do that. Because either we believe that they are human beings who can prosper when given opportunities, or we believe that they are morally bankrupt, or that they are somehow inferior or ontologically deficient. They are people who have not had the opportunities that the wealthy and well-connected have had, as they have built systems that keep their wealth in power. We should tax extreme wealth. The extreme wealth that we begin to see in the city must be taxed. We should tax very high income homes. My wife and I earn reasonable, it's probably not reasonable, people in DC make a whole lot more money than we do. We could live in the district, but we would be house rich and cash poor. We made different determinations as to how we want to take care of ourselves and provide for the future. So these very high value homes must be taxed. Profitable businesses must pay more. And. We should end frivolous tax breaks for real estate developers. I have been organizing in DC now for a decade, and we work hard to get things done. And at the last minute, these people, these developers, and the people that they fund keep us away from some justice and could make the city much better. We need a child tax credit that is not predicated on worth, but predicated on the fact that human beings deserve this kind of share in the largesse and the prosperity of the city. And we can have a child tax credit that will dramatically reduce child poverty and help children go farther in school and in community. My last comment is there is a myth flying around like Tinkerbell. That is that if we raise taxes, people will leave the district. That myth is not supported by data, by research, or facts. As a matter of fact, the poor are more likely to leave than the wealthy. And so I want to be very clear that if we have the courage, if we have the backbone to erase the inequities that have produced what we have, we can indeed hope for and persevere toward a different, better city where the largesse is shared among citizens.
Yeah, David?
It's hard to follow Pastor, very eloquent, testimony. I'm David Schwartzman. I'm testifying on behalf of Just Recovery DC. And I'm also a member of the steering committee of the Fair Budget Coalition. So, of course, I enthusiastically support the Fair Budget Just Recovery DC's open letter to the Tax Revision Commission, emphasizing its responsibility to implement racial equity and progressivity in the tax, what they recommend. So let's first take note of the utter failure to confront the racial and economic disparities by the trickle-down economic policies pursued by our mayors and, until recently, the DC Council, ever since the control board era. Balancing the budget on the backs of the poor, with the heavy weight of the federal city council promoting this agenda. From the most recent data, DC has the highest income inequality and homeless rate compared to the 50 states. And I document all of this in my testimony with footnotes. The child poverty rate was recently higher than all but 5 states. DC also has a big racial gap in wealth, of course. And and I think you have the statistics on that, and Erica Williams emphasized that DC's extreme wealth concentration exacerbates racial inequality, limits economic opportunity. Infant mortality is shockingly high in Ward 7 and 8, with DC and the US levels higher than Cuba. Of course, according to most recent data. And as I testified to this committee, that is a committee of the whole, on June 25th, 2021, the shockingly high life expectancy gap between Black and white residents has grown in the last 2 decades. Grown. This fact alone demonstrates the utter failure of trickle-down economic policies of DC government to address persistent racial and economic disparities. So I will point to first the Fair Taxes and Public Deals platform of the Fair Budget Coalition, and you can readily get that platform. I'm not going to read all of the recommendations, which include what was already mentioned, expand the child tax credit to marginalized families and so on. Considering the mayor's proposal presented to you on February 7th in her comeback plan to raise the median household income of Black residents $25,000 by 2028, I urge you to craft a tax policy that would rather target income support to the working class and low income communities, including Black and brown owners of small businesses, rather than simply raising the median income with potentially little impact on inequality in this community. We now witness, and I was at a rally this morning from Fair Budget, where we're witnessing a reprise of balancing the budget on the backs of the poor from the control board era when Tony Williams was CFO of the city council. Our mayors, and until recently our council, has continued to impose trickle-down economic policies which have perpetuated DC's racial economic disparities. And it's important to note in 2021, the council broke with this pattern, which was opposed by the federal city council and the mayor, by the way, to pass a long overdue tax hike on wealthy residents with a major fraction of revenue targeted to raising the DC earned income tax credit to match the federal. And basically boosting economic security for DC's working class is a path to building racial and economic equity in the district's post-COVID economic recovery. DC's tax structure must become truly progressive with higher taxes paid by wealthy residents and the big corporate sector to make this goal possible. And now I shared in my testimony, that PDF that you have, the ITEP tax burdens of families since 2014. And I won't go through them, but what we could see is that we have a present simulation from ITEP, which shows that millionaires are still paying slightly smaller share of their family income than working class residents. That is earning like average $55,000 a year. So it's basically flat. And it's important to point out that California, the top percentage, the top 1%, that is millionaires, actually are paying 12, in 2019, we're paying 12.4% of family income, higher. And I'll give you one example. I'm almost done. I know I'm supposed to have 2 or 3 minutes, but everybody took a little longer. So please bear with me. A 1% tax hike on millionaires' income income tax would generate at least $86 million a year, and probably more now. This was from data from 2020. And this tax hike would still be less than California's pay as a percent of family income. And this revenue stream, along with hikes in business taxes, could eliminate child poverty in DC with implementation of a generous child tax credit for low-income families, as DC Fiscal Policy Institute has advocated. So I proposed to Fair Budget, and I can share that with you, a sales exercise tax rebate for low-income residents, which actually put money in their pockets, roughly $1,000, to address their stress from the lack of income, which is clearly evident in this ongoing crisis that they're facing. Now I'll get very specific and very brief. Business taxes. You already heard great recommendations, and I was at the hearing when you heard them, January 31st. Mike Mazeroff's recommendations, tax REITs, that is real estate investment trust, and some other additional service tax. And I also, in the Fair Budget Recs, we also recommend a congestion charge, a progressive congestion charge for downtown DC, which is consistent with home rule, and putting that revenue to make public transit free and more convenient. And this would be a win for commuters because they breathe cleaner air. It'd certainly be a win for residents east of the river who are dying at 3 times the rate from air pollution than Ward 3. And by the way, I'm an environmental scientist. I've been retired from Howard for 10 years, 11 years, but I still do a lot of research in my free time, and I wouldn't be here if I wasn't retired, brother. So, and finally, I want to, and there's more details in my testimony, I want to urge you also to consider recommending getting behind a DC public bank. North Dakota has a public bank. This means that you put a publicly owned and managed bank to receive revenue and taxes instead of putting our revenue in Wall Street, where it doesn't do us much good. We have to pay fees and so on. Let's establish a public bank. I've been on the steering committee of the DC Public Banking Center for like 8 years. There was a feasibility study done. It should be followed up, and we could do wonders with that in terms of promoting social housing and other great benefits for our residents. So thank you for giving me more time. And I'm done. And a lot of details are in my testimony I submitted. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. Really appreciate this opportunity. My name is Keish Ladweteri. I am here today in my individual capacity, but I would like to express my solidarity with the Fair Budget Coalition and Just Recovery DC. I joined them in a commitment to a tax code that centers racial equity and one that funds public services that enable all DC residents to thrive. I'd like to focus my comments on your questions about what would a fairer tax code look like and how to make our tax code more racially equitable. For me, those two questions are actually the same. We need a tax code that is fairer, that is racially equitable, and I believe we have a long way to go. Because we are not anywhere near the level of progressivity that we need to be. I have been looking at the CFO's data on tax burdens, and my chart number 1, which is in my written statement, summarizes the tax burdens across the last 20 years for different income levels. And what this sort of, and I am sorry, I don't think all of you can see this, but what it basically shows us is that we have a tax code finally in 2020 that is progressive. It's so slightly progressive that it's basically flat. It used to actually be regressive, but now it's just basically flat. And that is not progressive at all, especially when you consider the income inequality in our city. The other thing that jumps out to me is that the highest income level in the CFO's data, 150,000 and above, that their tax rates have gone down. And this is at a time when income concentration has been so extreme that the CFO's data shows that the statistics of income data shows that those people who make $200,000 or more, they now take 57% of the income in our city. That's just 12% of the filers taking home 57% of the income. This is in line with what the Reverend has said in terms of the obscene levels of inequality. This is an exploitative and extractive economy that we're talking about, and our tax code has not adapted to that. I believe we should be addressing the core problem of why our economy works this way, but at least in the interim, let our tax code take account of it.
Could I look at the, your chart there? Could I have the,
Yes.
feel like a judge, because the clerk.
So basically what I did here is I took the tax burdens data, which the CFO publishes every year, and I basically created a chart that shows how it has changed over time. So this is all, and my written statement has the online links as well. I think Mike will know that. The other thing I want to point out is that,
So could I just say?
Yes.
So this chart is basically saying the taxes haven't kept up with inflation,
this is,
or haven't kept up with income growth?
this is as a percentage of income. So it is, that's why he calls it the tax burden. He basically takes different households at different levels of gross income, I believe, that it's not taxable.
That's right, that's right.
That's
And
right?
the top
Okay.
line, they look at the $150,000. So
Right.
they're not looking at households earning 300, 500.
Yeah, which I think is actually a real flaw. One of the things
Yeah.
I ask is that we need data for those really high levels. But the other point I'd like to make, and it's the chart on the other side, Jen, if you just flip over, to the point about the myth of tax flight. That chart shows how DC ranks in the DC metropolitan area in terms of tax burden. We are being compared to Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax County. In 2020, there were 8 regions that were compared. So we were one of 8. In the years before that, it was one of 6. We are now, in 2020, the lowest tax jurisdiction in the DC metro area. We rank 8th. So the CFO's own data shows the fact that we have a flat tax, the fact that we have the lowest tax rate in the area, the fact that our high income earners, for whom he doesn't even provide data, have an obscene level of the total income that is made, and therefore there's enormous room to make our tax code truly progressive. I have listed a number of ideas. We can go into them later, but they basically sort of center on the income tax and the property tax.
So to give full voice to your presentation, so you have like citations for the points you're making, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good, okay, good, that's good, I appreciate that.
And it is all the CFO's own data.
Appreciate that.
Thanks, Gish. I think Judy is.
Well, let me just say, well, we have one more. Okay, then I was gonna ask you all to just rebut some of the common claims of it.
Hi, can you all hear me?
We can hear you, yes, go ahead.
Yes, well, I apologize. I did not know that the video was not working. Otherwise, I would have busted to get down there with my colleagues who I was with this morning at the Wilson Building, many of them. So I really do apologize that I'm not on video, but I appreciate the invitation to be here. And I will start off right off the bat. My name is Judy Esty. I'm with the Platform of Hope, and I use the pronoun she, her, hers. And I'm not a tax expert. And I think that the closest qualification I have to tax expertise is that my birthday is April 18th, which this year was tax day. And that's about it. Okay. So I am, so honored to be on here with so many of my very intelligent colleagues who are offering up a lot of data. And I'm not going to do that. I probably was supposed to be with these service providers, but I'm the trouble child when it comes to scheduling, apparently. What I hope I can, however, offer, and this is with all the respect to the data points and the economic read that folks have already shared, is that I feel that my value here is to remind us all that yes, we can talk about data, but what we're really talking about is people's lives and what the experience is like to live in DC or have to leave DC. And I want to thank the Reverend in particular and others who have brought up this myth of, well, this concern that wealthy, probably mostly white people will leave if they don't like the taxes here. And we're more concerned with that than the actual proven reality that tens of thousands of primarily Black and brown, economically vulnerable residents, or even middle class residents, have actually left because it is too expensive to live here. Why wouldn't the latter be more concerning to us than the myth? And so the Platform of Hope is a pilot initiative. It was founded 5 years ago by 4 organizations I'm sure you'll be familiar with: Jubilee Housing, Mary Center, Sitar Art Center, and Jubilee Jumpstart. And we're in Ward 1, which is a very resource-rich community, right? But it's also a community that really does show what happens when people of color are forced out of communities that they have thrived in, that they have called their home, but they can no longer afford to live in. And they move to other areas where the experience of poverty becomes more acute because all of a sudden the grocery stores and the transportation and the schools and the health centers that they used to have access to are farther away and under-resourced. So the Platform of Hope works with right now 75 mostly Black and brown families who are 95% making less than 30% of the area median income. And being in community with these families has reminded me of what it actually looks like to try to live in this city when you do not have the economic options. So just to directly quote from 2 families, this is recent journal entries that they provided. One participant wrote, "What motivates me, but at the same time also takes up a lot of my time, is my job. I have to wake up at 4:30 a.m. and I get back home to prepare food at 3 p.m. On Wednesday and Friday, my youngest daughter has ballet, and on Tuesday and Thursday, soccer, and I am drained. I want to help, and I want to help others to help me, but I've lost a lot of people because I haven't had time to take care of them." Another father of 4 wrote, "My goal is to have 2 jobs so I can save for my future and for my children." This is the actual reality for so many families of what it's like to live in DC. Now, in case you're wondering, you can't see me, but I am a white woman. I am a white woman who lives in Columbia Heights in a brownstone, and I would probably be considered middle class. That might, depending on your definition of middle class. But and a lot of my friends are make some nice money. I'm not gonna lie. And so when I hear this, like, well, what if we asked people to pay more? I'm like, they're already paying more. Okay, who here has been to Le Diplomat for dinner? They're already paying more. You know how much a lobster salad is, right? So this idea that folks can't pay more, they can pay more, and they are paying more. They're just not paying more to the district government. They're paying more for all the other things that cost a lot of money in this economy and they're willing to pay for. And just earlier today, as David mentioned, other people, we were at a rally for the DC Council, and the reality is there's not enough money in this budget for the services that we need to run this city. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program has been slashed by 80%. Domestic violence service prevention efforts have been decreased by 20%, despite the fact that we know that DV has only increased because of the pandemic. We aren't giving TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, has been slashed. We're not giving SNAP a raise because of the inflation that's needed. We're not funding new housing vouchers because the government's too slow to give them out. So we figure, oh well. So the truth is, we have so many expenses in the city that we need to fund, and the mayor's response is that we don't have enough money. So for the question that this tax commission has raised of, well, how can we, advance racial equity and be more resilient to economic impact? I mean, I think it's pretty simple. I think we need to raise more money. And I think we need to raise more money from people who can afford to give more money. So that's my very simple assessment. I applaud everyone who's provided the very complex details that are needed. But at the end of the day, I think that if we want to be a city that actually supports the residents who deserve to live here and who, as you have heard, are working so hard to support their families, we have to just do what makes the most sense, which is increase the taxes on the wealthy. They can actually afford it. And, do we really, I'll throw in a little Succession reference, do we want to be supporting Logan Roys of this community? I don't think so. So I really hope that you all will take that into consideration. I do apologize again for not being there in person, and I'm happy to answer any other questions. And I apologize. I don't know how much time I took, but hopefully it wasn't too much.
Judy, thank you. Thank you for being here by phone. I think we've heard from everybody who we invited to be part of this conversation. So I'm going to open up to commissioners for questions.
I wanted to learn a little bit more about the auto-populated tax returns. Are there any states doing this right now in the US?
No, not to my knowledge.
Do you know if you would have to have access to last year's tax returns as well to auto-populate?
So my current understanding of some other countries and some reports that I've seen about it, what it would look like in the US, it would basically, the DC government would take information from an individual's employer and their bank, and then pre-fill a tax return, and then that individual, it would most likely be OTR. OTR would send it to the individual would look at it, make sure it was okay, sign it off. It's done.
And they'll do it both for the federal 1040 and the local income tax forms?
I think that's possible, yes.
I remember reading a paper about this a couple of years ago, maybe last year. I think this system works really well it doesn't work well for singles. It doesn't work well for wealthy households. And you may just say that you don't particularly care about that. Singles, because their situation changes so much from one year to other. But I think that's a really interesting idea.
And also there are some inherent assumptions that the individuals all have additional bank accounts.
And that's actually a really great point. Thank you for mentioning that. So something that we see at legal studies with our client community, which earlier is 200% below the federal poverty level, we see a high proportion of unbanked, underbanked individuals and families. So, like I said, this is a proposal from other countries. My assumption is they aren't facing the same barriers that we are. To the Reverend's point, their engagement with capitalism might be a little bit different than ours. So I would ask for OTR and for this commission to consider and work legally to have, we're not experts in taxes by any means, but we are happy to provide our perspective in terms of our relationship to our client community. And we're happy to work with you to OTR figure out how that would look specifically in the district. That it would undoubtedly, but it would work well.
I mean, it could be a way to get more people banked, to get more people file taxes.
Especially because then you can get your money into your bank account directly. Your tax return into your bank account if you are in board 7, 5, 7, and 8.
So what would you say to the, I'll give you a couple arguments. So I've heard, clearly are not buying the argument that, raise taxes above a certain point, you're gonna encourage people to, move out of the district, out of this taxing jurisdiction. I get that. What about the argument that you hear that 20% of the taxpayers, maybe it's less, basically pay 80% of the 80% of the burden of government, of which a big majority is schools and human services? Isn't that progressive?
Well, it just shows it just illustrates the extreme income inequality. Obviously, even if you have a flat tax rate, let's say overall, and that would include sales exercise tax, property, and income tax, right? Then the wealthy with a flat rate would pay more than the bottom. A matter of fact, the millionaires, the high income folk, residents should pay even more of the total than they are now, because this would reduce income inequality. It would provide revenue to raise
So to be
the income of the
to be
bottom,
to be devil's
yeah,
devil's
so
advocate.
it's
But to be devil's advocate, if we, and I'm not saying this from, I'm just questioning. Say 20 years ago, the budget was 6 billion, now it's approaching 20 billion. Poverty rate hasn't changed, how would more,
Yeah.
even if more money could solve the problem, a lot of money hasn't solved it in the past.
Well,
I would agree.
You would agree with that, right?
I think you're
go first.
introducing, the question of what we do with our money is hugely problematic and is a question of the budget, which is a whole nother can of worms. So I do agree. I feel like there's a huge problem about how we spend our money. But given the scope of this commission, I will say that my understanding of those kind of statistics about the rich paying the vast share of taxes, that is, those arguments are based solely on the income tax, which is the only progressive part of our system, whether it's the ITEP analyses, whether it's the CFO's analyses that looks at all the taxes across the board, including sales, property, income, and all the rest of it, shows that that is not a correct statement. That it is far more broadly shared, and that I mean, as the CFO's data shows, there's like 2 percentage points difference between the lowest tier and the highest tier, which pays, which makes 7 times the money. And that's not even looking at the truly wealthy who earn,
Right.
20 times more.
I got you. And just to be clear, you would disagree with a number of tax experts would say DC has one of the most progressive tax systems in the country. You would disagree with that?
Yes, I do, because that again is a misstatement. I agree, they are correct to say we are the least regressive. We are the least regressive of the 50 states. The other states have horribly regressive systems. But least regressive does not add up to actually
I
progressive.
got you. It's a wrong standard.
Wrong state.
I would actually disagree with my friend here a little bit. The last time I looked, Delaware actually has a modestly progressive tax burden, according to ITEP. California has a progressive tax burden, except for the bottom. I mean, if they adopted, did their own earned income tax credit like we do, they could be the model for the whole country. But just to address your point earlier, how do we spend our money? Let's look at 2 examples. The Housing Production Trust Fund is the main instrument to provide affordable housing, but all these hundreds of millions of dollars a year have basically subsidized developers to build mainly market rate housing, which has driven rents up. Yes, some affordable housing is produced, but the majority of residents are paying more than 30% of their household income for a rent. And that's the latest data we have. The other example is TANF. The most recent data on TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, the income support level in DC is 37% of the federal poverty level. You know what state has the highest? New Hampshire, 60% of the federal poverty level. So white children in New Hampshire are getting 60%, mainly black children in DC are getting 37%. And that's why in my testimony I said some modest revenue, and we recommended fair budget like told $68 million over 2 years to raise it to New Hampshire's level, but it should even be higher. We could use different instruments like a child tax credit to abolish child poverty in DC, because that is such a harmful effect on children, on their family, on the community. It's a human rights violation. And we could do much better, and we're supposed to be a human rights city. 2008, we became a human rights city officially, but we are committing human rights violations. And let me finally just make a quick point, which I left out of my testimony. In 2021, the council passed this tax hike on the wealthy. Long overdue, but this partially captured the tax cut that the wealthy were getting from the Trump tax legislation, which is still in existence. And business community is still getting it. Why not capture at least a portion of that tax cut from the big corporate sector? We would get very significant revenue and repeat what we did in 2021. I hope that the Tax Revision Commission puts that in their recommendations. Would make a big impact. And I actually asked Michael Mazeroff about that after he testified. He said, yeah, I mean, his recommendations is a way of doing it. You capture back a part of the tax cut that these very profitable enterprises are getting from the federal government for us, for the people, and put it in the programs that people need, like ERAP, that people suffering from homelessness and poverty, that's implementing your charge. You know, racial equity and progressivity. Okay, well, I think I spoke enough, but I'm very emotional about this because I got involved in this whole thing during the control board era. You know, when we're seeing a repeat of that, and we need to address this. We could be a model for the country. We are in terms of renewable energy. I'm an environmental scientist. I'm a climate scientist, actually. And we are a model in that regard. Let's show the country that we have abolished child poverty, that we've abolished homelessness, and we will be raised to the top, not to the bottom. And thank you, Pastor, for inspiring me.
Mutual inspiration.
Can I also say something in response to that? Because it sounds a little bit like, and I might be mishearing the point, but the idea that because government programs have not solved the multi-centuries of systemic inequity, that we should not invest in them, which to me doesn't really make sense, because what I keep seeing is that we have these programs, we underinvest in them, they're poorly run. I mean, look at what's going on with housing, right? And then we say, oh, it didn't work. See, can't solve it. Let's give it even less money and see if it works better. And usually Underinvesting in a program that's already not working well does not help it. And so what we're seeing right now is that, ERAP, for example, is a program that is badly needed. That's why we've run out of the $42 million in ERAP 6 months into the fiscal year. So we've run out of $42 million in 6 months, showing that there is a need for the program. And next year, the mayor has proposed $8 million for the entire year. But the other thing I want to speak to is that there is a huge difference between a program like ERAP, which is the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which is basically supposed to stop harm, immediate harm, right? Think of it like we have to fund the fire department so that when fires happen, fires are put out. That's very different from saying oh, we're saving the environment by putting out fires. We're doing something proactive. No, we're stopping an emergency. So a lot of the programs that are being slashed are just stopping the emergency. They're not actually investing in any sort of multi-generational strategy for, building wealth. You see, there are some other things, there's the child bonds, there's pilot programs about earned income, I'm sorry, not earned income, the guaranteed income. There are programs that are being proposed that would do that. But in order to fund those programs, you also have to fund the emergency programs. So if you're underfunding the emergency programs and you're also not funding progressive programs, and then you're saying, well, why is poverty not solved? I think we have our answer.
We could continue this discussion, so thank you for that.
Yeah, I actually, part of this makes me think about, someone mentioned earlier, just the nature of the economy that produces inequality and poverty sort of replicates it over time. We're not talking about the same poor people today as were 20 years ago, right? It's different people. But we continually sort of reproduce this same situation. And we did have a really great presentation from Brad McCartney about some of the ways that we're missing people. And I think it speaks to the recommendation you came with, Jen, about the advocacy for folks who are incarcerated. That really interesting, because we have a lot of programs that are really predicated on whether people are working or not, supporting people who are working, and we miss a whole sort of slice of folks that have very little ability to connect to the labor market and just kind of get dropped in a nutshell. We have a lot of tools that we've built to help reach folks in that bucket. And so, what Dr. Hardy said was, the EIDC does a really great job of reducing income inequality between Black and white folks at certain income levels, but not lower than that because of that attachment workforce inability to connect. So what are we doing about things like that? And so I like this idea of trying to find ways to reach folks who aren't so easily connected to the labor force. And I think we should dig into that a little bit more as a commission. And then, my follow-up question maybe to Mayor Williams' question is for you all who are also thinking about the budget side of things. We are not here to examine that, but what are the big vision sort of investments that you think advocates, others are kind of thinking about, or communities are thinking about over the next decade? Because I think that would be helpful if we're in terms of we need to raise revenue. Okay, what kind of level are we talking about? And you may not have exact numbers, but I'm just curious what kind of things.
One thing for me, if I may, is around violence and corruption. If we talk about investments over time, when these investments have yielded, we've had policing with extraordinary money, but crime has not been solved. And nobody says, well, the police have been ineffective. They're able to drive higher budgets, and crime has not disappeared. So with violence and corruption, we've had poor investment, underinvestment, and you give it, I'm being hyperbolic, 2 weeks, and then you tank it and say it doesn't work. We're having at Metropolitan, in concert with other faith communities, people of goodwill, Pinto chairs public safety. to share with her that violence interruption can and does work, but give us the 150 years you've given policing before you say that it does. And I think that one of the things to bring into the room is still the notion that Max Weber wrote about, the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, which pervades that wealth means that people are good. That wealth means that you have God's favor, that theologically you are in a different place, and that essentially, if you look at what we fund, whom we fund, what we say, these poor people, these black people, they're bad. There's something wrong. They're morally deficient. That they can, but they won't. And I'm just here to say that we know from Michelle Alexander and everyone else that these groups of people are no more prone to criminal activity, no more prone to shaking down government, no more prone to all of these things, these awful anecdotes that are anti-Black, that are racialized. We have to attack that. And we have to be clear that our policy is tied up in our anthropology, in our assessment of certain human beings. And of course, that's beyond the purview of this space to change the way that people view other human beings, but that is written into the way that we do policy.
That's an excellent question. As an environmental scientist, I'll start with that. I think the free metro should be funded over the next decade. Now the free bus service is threatened, even though the funding was certified and it's not in the mayor's budget. So that we should certainly begin with free metro, free bus service, and then free metro. And it has a health and environmental impact, a big health and environmental impact, because the many cities around the world, for instance, China, they've electrified their buses. We have started to, but that should be accelerated. And that would clean the air. We should also reduce, of course, car traffic. And of course, there is a trend to electric, but I think the solution to transportation shouldn't be simply to replace gasoline cars with electric cars. We need to move more to free public transit, which is non-polluting, electrified. And this also bears on investment in electrifying homes. And I know Charles Allen has a bill already to give income support for low-income or working-class families to electrify, because we should get away from gas. As a climate scientist, natural gas is leaking out of our streets. It has a big greenhouse gas footprint. Matter of fact, greater than coal. My oldest son and I have written papers on this, on renewable energy transition. We should prioritize getting rid of gas. And I would also, of course, support a guaranteed income program, and not simply pilot, but to ensure there's no poverty, and abolish poverty. Start with child poverty, but abolish poverty. We can, with a more equitable tax structure, and of course we need federal support too, and I hope that the movements nationally could reinforce our own efforts as well, and becoming a state sooner than later, so we can have control over, real control over our budget and legislation. We all know what's going on now. So becoming a state, we could have a much better constitution than the one that's in the bill, which was a minimalist one. You go back to 1982, you see a very progressive constitution that was actually passed by voters. And finally, in housing, social housing is a model which Will Merrifield pioneered talking about when he ran for office, and he's now is promoting it. And Vienna is a model, and I told Councilmember Robert White, go visit Vienna and see what they're doing. Social housing could be really provide affordable housing for people. That is, rents no more than 30% of household income, which is the HUD measure, and will also lower rents outside of social housing. This is the experience in Vienna, and community land trust is another approach. So we needed to decommodify housing as a human right. Let's really move to a human rights city and make that real. Thank you.
Anything else? Any other questions?
Judy has a question.
Okay.
Judy, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Well, I think my question can be sort of also an answer to Erica's question, which is talking about the benefits cliff. And as we're having this conversation about, ending poverty and why are people still poor, et cetera, the conversation I have a lot with families is this idea of like, if I take this small increase in my wages, my rent will go up because I'll have to recertify. And each year I recertify, I pay more in my rent. And I know this was a big conversation when, case in point of what an increase in income can do, when DC passed the new tax code in fiscal year 2022, that money was able to increase wages for early childcare providers. It went to an expanded earned income tax credit and some other things. So, but I know because many of our families are working in early childcare, they were concerned about if I get a wage increase, yes, that's additional income, but I'm going to lose benefits that I used to qualify for. Even in case of like, did you know that, and I'm probably going to get the number wrong, but there is a limit to how much money you can even have in your savings account if you want to qualify for certain benefits. So we're basically telling families, we don't want you to be poor, but we don't want you to save money either. Because if you save money, we're no longer going to give you access to resources. We see this all the time with families who are trying to get a childcare voucher. In order to get a childcare voucher so your kid can be taken care of, you need to have a job. But they can't get a job because they don't have childcare. So one of the questions, I guess, which is my answer to Eric's question, that I would like to see is actually examining all of these benefits cliffs. In the childcare industry, they call it the donut. And basically, it's at a point where a family makes too much money to get the voucher, but childcare is still so expensive that they cannot afford the childcare without the voucher. And so one of the things that we are seeing is, even as we're talking about trying to support, really our folks making the lowest amount of money, if we're trying to support people in moving into the middle class and building multi-generational wealth, particularly Black and brown families, we have to be looking at how the benefits system actually penalizes people for doing just that, which is earning more money and trying to save money. And so I don't know if that's something the tax commission has been looking at all, but I think it's something we have to do, because if our programs are driving people to try to lower their income so that they don't lose benefits, then there is another reason that we are perpetuating the system that we are saying we're against. Thank you.
That's helpful. And to the extent that those benefits are located within the tax system, that certainly is something.
I think Ed's gonna bring it into I think I saw in his testimony the next session that he's calling from opt out of the monthly payment of their tax credit, which is part of the LGT improvement, the one that could cause folks to lose some benefits, SNAP in particular, WIC, possibly Medicaid.
Let me ask one more question. I don't know, either Jan or Judy, I don't know if you have an answer to this question, but I'd be interested in if you can circle back to folks in your communities, in the communities you're working in. And it's around, Erica alluded to this earlier, around participation and people actually claiming the benefits to which they're entitled. And there's obviously been a ton of work done on that front in the EITC area. I'm wondering about the property tax provisions. DC has a number of things in its property tax that a wide range of families might be eligible for. scheduled circuit breaker, homestead deduction. And the data aren't great, but there is some sense that families are not always getting, I'm sure it's the case, that families are not always getting what they're eligible for, and in some sense that may be fairly widespread. I'm wondering either what, if you have any experience in the communities that you're working with in terms of hearing about challenges that folks have accessing the benefits or even knowing about it, or promising models or approaches to addressing that problem. Who's doing work in the communities that is helping with that?
I can't say that I have any experience in that particularly, but I can speak with our units, and they might have experience, so I can get back to you about that.
That'd be great.
I would say in general, for us, I see sort of like three categories. I see folks who are used to, using the Vista services, the free services. And so like their experience of doing taxes and what tax breaks they're aware of is as good as the services that they get, right? And so that would be a question of, are those Vista people, the people providing the free tax services, aware and trained to ask about that? We do frequently, uplift EITC, the expanded child tax credit to families to make sure they're aware of that. But those smaller things, no, we haven't heard a lot about that. I would also say, and I think somebody else brought this up in their testimony, I apologize, I forget who did, but we also work with some, primarily I'll say like immigrant families who have a deep distrust and are very concerned about their taxes. And I'm going to be honest, like I feel like those people get taken advantage of because they go to these private tax services thinking that they have to get this special expertise, and they're ripped off, quite frankly. And I've also been working with DCFPI and Erica on, trying to expand the earned income tax credit for folks who are undocumented. And where we have landed is that actually there are like just logistical reasons why it's not really going to be possible, because in order to even register with an I-10, it takes a certain qualification that the DC tax code won't do. So I'll let Erica speak more about that because she's been very tapped in. But I'll just say, to Jen's point, others' point, even the experience of doing taxes for the folks in our community is usually, a deeply stressful and often very expensive process.
We are just about at time. Thank you all so much for making time. This is really helpful. Please share with folks the word about meetings and opportunities to provide additional to the website. I would say particularly, you all are working in communities that are not necessarily have table this one. So I encourage you to speak on this. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us more than 3 minutes.
Is it okay if we sit in and listen to the next one?
Sit in the back there.